morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Bola Adedeji from the Office of Clinical Site Oversight here at the Division of AIDS. I want to thank you all very much for the opportunity to have this discussion with you today. And as you know, we're going to be talking about Pilot 1. And just as a reminder, Pilot 1 is how the PF will be distributed to the clinical research sites. So before I start on the rest of the information before the slides this morning, I would like to have the few NIAID staff in here just introduce themselves to you as well.
I'm Emily Lindy. I'm the Chief Grants Management Officer for NIAID.
I'm Donna Sullivan. I'm one of the branch chiefs in the Grants Management Program.
And I'm Mary Kirker. I'm here as a consultant working on Pilot 1 and Pilot 2.
All right, and we have several representatives from CTUs and CRSs. Just in the interest of time, we won't go through specific introductions. However, we would ask that when you speak or send your questions, then you might just introduce yourselves and say where you're from. So up to date, we've had a series of discussions with each of the HIV and AIDS network groups. And we've received a lot of very good feedback from each and every one of them, all the 5 network groups. So what we're doing now, this is the third of 3 CTU and CRS focused discussions, where we will be hoping that you will provide us with your feedback or your questions or comments about this entire initiative. We really want to hear from you. Just as a note, I would also like to point out that since the time that we initially rolled out this initiative back a couple of months ago, we've made some changes along the way, just based on some of the feedback that we've received. So I just want you to know that the feedback that you provide to us is very important. It's going to guide some of the decisions that we make. So we really want you to be very engaged in this process and provide us your honest feedback and comments about this entire initiative, because it would help us to make the program as efficient as possible. You know, we really wanted to give the CTUs and CRSs a voice as well, so that we consider your perspectives as we make some decisions. So we're seeking that input from you. If for some reason you're not able to ask your questions today, or you think of something later on, please feel free to email us, call us. We'll be at network meetings. Stop us and ask those questions. We really want to hear from you. If you want to have a special call between us and your CTU, we're open to that as well. So, you know, the forum is here for you to provide your input, and we really, really want to hear from you. So, in the coming weeks and months. So, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Kirker to go through the slides, and we will ask that as we go through, if you have specific questions, please feel free to stop us or to stop Mary, so that we can address those questions along the way. So thank you all very much once again, and I'll turn it to Mary.
This is Mary Kirker. The slide set actually tries to explain how we think that this Pilot 1 will be working for the next fiscal year awards. So a lot of the slides you may have already seen from the webinar that we did a few months back. These have now been expanded to talk in terms of some levels of specificity. Nothing has been finalized, but I think it's really, and therefore it's very important that you're looking at this and trying to figure out how you as a CTU or a CRS are going to handle the new way of doing business for funding PF. So basically, PF will be supported in 2 ways. In fiscal year 2018, it's going to be supported in 2 ways. The first is that the CTUs will receive, for their CRSs, they will receive funds for ongoing participants, the predictable expenses for those ongoing participants that were put on study as of 11/30 and have continuing visits and things that have to be done in the upcoming budget period. They will also be paying, because they are considered predictable expenses, the protocol closeout expenses. That will be taken into account as well. And finally, I think it's hopefully is very basic and understandable, that the CTU, because they're only paying for those predictable ongoing participants, the first visit is never going to be paid by the CTU. The first visit is always going to be paid by the LOCs. So let's go to the LOCs. The LOCs' responsibilities, and they will be receiving PF as well, will be to pay for the initiation of protocols, as well as the initiation and the expenses for participants, new participants as of 12/1, which is the beginning of next year's budget period. They will also be paying for the new studies, getting places set up for new studies, as well as the participants that are on those new studies. They will be paying for some predictable expenses. They will obviously be paying for the participants, all participants, ongoing as well as new, at protocol-specific sites, sites that are not affiliated with a CTU. In addition, they will be paying for any short-term studies. As of right now, we're looking at any short-term studies would be paid for by the LOCs. And short-term is being defined as 6 months or less, a study that's 6 months or less. They will also be responsible for some of the unique and variable individual protocol expenses. So, for example, one of the examples that's been given earlier is that you have a protocol. These are the predictable visits, but at visit 3, based on what's going on with that individual, maybe the individual's sick or whatever, they need a colonoscopy. That particular cost is not predictable, and therefore that particular cost would be part of the LOCs would be responsible for paying for that expense. In addition, there may be a very unusual protocol development that, or protocol expense that will need to be negotiated with NIAID that would stay with the LOCs rather than the core. Does that make sense to everybody? Anybody have any questions on this? Okay. So now we're getting back to some of the slides you have seen in the webinar. Basically, what's going to happen with the CTU PF funding, we will be funding on the CTU ongoing protocol participants, and it will be divided between two awards. The first award will be a designation of all participants as of October 31st, 2017. We will be getting that information in September, and we would be putting the funds for those participants in the CTU and the initial December award. We understand that there may, and we hope, will be new participants, ongoing participants, that will be put on study from September 1st through November 30th when the current budget period ends. We will be getting that information on how many other participants were put on study in February, and we'll be revising an award in March, so that by March, any CTU will have the predictable expenses for ongoing participants for the entire year. We will be getting this information from obviously from the networks. So the networks are going to provide us with the information on in every particular CTU and all the CRSs, the number of ongoing participants that have been put and will be followed in the upcoming awards. So all 5 of the networks will be providing us with this information. So how will we get there? How will we get from the networks providing us the information to the funds in the CTU for these ongoing participants? This is just an example. So we're going to take a particular fake protocol, which is basically, we call it MTN 001, in which we've been provided the information from the network in September that they're going to need $18,000 to cover those participants that are on the study. And as you can see here, we're going to get from the networks information on the 13 currently ongoing participants from CTU-A and CTU-B, as well as an estimate of ongoing participants that's expected from that 9/1 start date from the last time we received actual numbers from the network to the from that period through 11/30 when the budget period ends. So in this particular example, in September, from the networks, we have received that CTUA should be receiving $8,000 because they have 8 ongoing participants as of 8/31. CTUB will be given $5,000 because they have actually 5,000 participants in study. And again, they estimate by CTU the number of other ongoing participants that they expect to have on study. This information that's being provided to us to help us with our determination on funding will also be provided from the networks or from us. We haven't quite worked that out yet, but this information will be provided to the CTUs and the CRSs. So the networks, the CTUs, and the CRSs will all have the same information. And that's what and in December, we will use that information to issue the award. So in this particular case, we knew we had 13 ongoing participants. We are going to provide $13,000 to CTU, $8,000 to CTUA, and $5,000 to CTUB. In February, we will be getting updated information from the networks. Now remember, they had estimated that there was going to be 18 participants for $18,000. But when push came to shove and they've gotten the actual number of participants in study, what they actually have on study is CTUA is going to have 10 participants and CTUB will have 7 participants. I think it's very important to note here, as we talk about transparency, that in all cases it isn't just the CTU information. You're also going to be able to see what the CRS is, what the CRS, we're expecting the CRS to get with the number of participants they have on study. So we will then be revising the award in March, and we will be providing CTUA with $10,000 and the CTUB with the $7,000 for those additional participants. And again, just like the information we received in September, this information will be provided from the networks to us, and it will also be provided to the CTUs and the CRSs. So in the end, we're going to make 2 awards, but I think it's one of the reasons why I go back to this slide is for people to understand it's for the entire year. A lot of people talk, there's been a lot of discussion that there may be a gap. There will be no gap. If an individual is an ongoing participant as of November 30th, 2017, the CTU will receive, and hopefully the CRS, I'm expecting the CRS and the CTU will receive for fiscal year 2018 award an entire year's worth of money for those individuals. It's just going to be provided at 2 different times. So this is an example, a preliminary example of sort of a template that we're going to be developing for the networks to get this information, so we're able to make decisions as well as the CTUs and the CRSs.
So Mary, let me interrupt a minute, please.
No problem.
We just got a question. One of the grantees would like you to repeat the calculation method you discussed in the previous 2 slides. They really didn't understand the calculations you were doing.
Okay, so let's go through the calculations for this particular, I'm going to go a few more slides over. If you look here, what we have is that the MTN for ongoing participants, because we've gotten that information from the networks, their ongoing participant expenses, as far as the MTN is concerned, for this particular protocol, is that there's $18,000 for ongoing participant expenses. We will be getting that information from the networks. What we will also be getting from the networks is how that amount of money is divided. In this particular case, it's $1,000 for participants. So what they're telling us, what they will be telling us is that as of August 31st, there are 13 participants on study. as of October 31st, there's 13 participants that are on study and will have ongoing costs in the future year. They will then say, of those 13 participants, this is where they are located, and this is the amount of money that should be provided for their location. So in this case, this is in CTUA is going to receive $8,000, and we're expecting that CTUA, the amount of money is going to be divided between CRS1 that has 5 participants and CRS2 that has 3 participants. In this case, and it ends up being the $8,000 we're planning to provide for CTUA. CTUB only has 1 CRS that has participants on the study. They have 5, and they will be receiving $5,000 based on the number of participants they have on study. In addition, the networks are going to say, but we are expecting, because of the way they're enrolling or some preliminary information that we've received from the CTU or the CRS, we're anticipating another 5 participants. That's why it's coming up to 18,000. We're anticipating another 5 participants that will be put on study between September 1 and November 30th. And it will be divided between, based on their understanding, they'll be divided between the CTUA and CTUB. The network's understanding, as well as negotiations, because I understand there's discussions that's taking place between the two.
Actually, this ties into the next question. And how are you going to take into account the different stages a given CRS may be in while implementing a protocol? Visit frequency and cost of procedures varies over time as the protocol is rolled out.
And actually, we're depending on the network to provide us with that information. This was a very easy example. What we're expecting them to be doing is looking at the participants in study and say, for example, instead of $5,000 and $1,000 per participant, 3 of those 5 participants are halfway through the study. So they're only going to need $500 for those 3 participants. So they will be providing us with that. They'll be working through that level of detail. But one of the reasons I think it's extremely important for everyone to look at this information and for us to have that information available to the CTU in the CRS is that you're going to be able to see whether or not how accurate the number of participants are, that they are capturing all the participants that should be captured and taking into account the amount of money that's necessary for those participants to continue on study. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this as early as that we're trying to get this information in August and get it for the August 31st deadline. We're trying to get it for September so that we can actually provide it to the CTUs and the CRSs for the CTUs and the CRSs to evaluate to see if that makes any sense.
And I think you just answered that, but the question just came in. At what point will the CTUs be requested to submit this information?
The CTUs will be requested. I cannot tell you that because you're going to be requested from the networks. The networks are going to require you to request that information. We will require you to submit it as part of your budget and the RPPR. But the networks are going to ask from you. We're going to be hopefully working with you, and I know that they work very closely with you in determining on how to calculate the both number of participants as well as costs. Does that make sense? Okay, so I don't think I need to go to the rest of this. I hope not. So. This is a preliminary template. This template is being revised even as we speak. What we're hoping that this template will allow you to do is for you to look at your particular site, let's say line number 1, the ABC CRS and Dr. Smith's CTU award, the ABC CRS, and you'll be able to look and say, okay, I think I'm going to get $1 million for that particular protocol, and how you're going to get the funds based on the number of participants that you put on the study. So we have.
So there's actually a question about the award, and I'll go back, please. So will the PF funds be awarded as part of the main core award from NIH? Currently, the CRSs receive funds from the core award and via separate agreements with the networks.
Yes, the award, the amount of the award will be a total cost for all networks. So let's just say your CTU, your CT is the ACRS under that ACTU is involved with 5 networks. We will be getting the information from all 5 networks, and the amount the amount of the notice of award for both March and December will reflect a total amount of money for that PF. So it's not coming from the network, it will be coming as part of the notice of award to the CTU. Okay. So let's go through 3 different scenarios, and these 3 different scenarios are one, I think I really want you to spend some time looking at and thinking about these, hopefully they're not too busy slides, because this is based on sort of discussions and needs that have come up with some preliminary discussions we've had with the networks, to be honest with you, as well as internally within the Institute, and some additional discussions with CTUs. So, scenario 1 is our what we are considering a typical protocol. We have a protocol that's been ongoing for some time. There are ongoing participants in this year's award, in fiscal year 2017 awards, and those ongoing participants are going to have additional expenses that need to be covered, very predictable expenses that need to be covered in the next budget period, and those predictable expenses are going to be the PF that's going to be provided to the CTU for that CRS. So let's go through the scenario, this first scenario. So in this particular case, Dr. Smith's CTU for this ABC CRS is on this in MTN 025. If everything goes as planned, we're expecting that ABC CRS should receive $1 million for support of ongoing and new participants in that study. That's what that first line says. The way it's going to be provided is for the first 100 patients, and these 100 participants, these 100 participants are on board as of 8/31/2017. So in December, we will provide Dr. Smith's CTU for that ABC CRS $555,555. Next time I do these slides, I'm going to make it even numbers. $555,555 for those ongoing participants. Those are predictable expenses for participants we know that are on study as of 8/31/2017. In that first level, the first bit of information, we will also be receiving from the networks the anticipated participants. They know that Dr. Smith and ABC, the CRS, is able to put participants on gangbusters. They're really able to do it, and they have a number of people that are in the pipeline. They believe that they're going to be actually able to put another 50 participants in study. That's the discussions, of course, that are taking place with the LOCs, with the leaderships and the networks. So if they do, then we would be providing in March the $277,777. But remember the example I gave. If something is either less or more, we're going to be providing it on the actual participants that are on study negotiated with the networks. But these are ongoing participants, so if everything goes as planned, CRS ABC will have 150 participants on study with ongoing expenses in the next fiscal year, budget period, at a level of $833,332. That's the amount of money, if everything goes as planned, that Dr. Smith's CTU will receive by March for the number of participants that are on study for that particular CRS. In addition, because we realize that there's going to be new participants that are going to be put on study, the LOCs will continue to be providing for those new participants, because those are not predictable like the other expenses. This is really based on whether or not a participant can be put on study. The LOCs will continue to pay for those new participants, those unpredictable new participants. So in this particular case, based on this information, if the ABC CRS puts 180 participants in the study, they should be getting 833 from the CTU award and another 166 from the LOC. Does that make sense to people? I'd like people to sort of look at that. I'm going to take a second for you to think about it and see if you have any questions.
There is a question here. Will CRSs invoice the LOC for new participants or just have a payment schedule of some kind?
We are not expecting the LOCs to change their invoicing process as of right this second. So it really depends on how the LOC has set up their invoicing. They will be doing it for the new participants only, but some LOCs will reimburse sort of based on, you know, the participants in the study and you get the funds, and other ones require cost reimbursement, subcontracting. Unfortunately, at this midstream, this is not something that we could actually handle. So it's going to, most likely you're going to be working with each of the LOCs based on how you're currently doing business with those particular LOCs. Okay, so let's go to scenario 2. This is the one where we, if you remember back in my very first slide, about 1 million years ago, in my very first slide, I mentioned that one of the things we've spoken about are short-term studies. If this is a short-term study, and it's been defined as 6 months or less, and 6 months and less, but that also includes follow-up for those particular participants. So anything that has a longer follow-up, of course, would not necessarily be considered under this scenario a short-term study. If it's a short-term study, no matter what, it's going to be handled by the LOC, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for us. At one of the discussions, that it didn't make a whole lot of sense to parse those funds out between what goes to the CTU and what needs to go to the LOC. That's the initial plan. Any questions on that? Okay, so let's go to my favorite, and I'm going to spend a lot more time on this one, which is scenario number 3. There are protocols out there. We understand that there are protocols out there that have a variance or an intensity that may affect whether or not you're able to predict the future visits and the number of participants that are on study for the protocol. The example that was provided is that you have a protocol where the first 2 visits, there are actually people that are on protocol, but so many people, it's so intense for the first 2 visits that so many of those individuals actually never make it to visit number 3. Once they make it to visit number 3, it's fairly straightforward, very predictable. They most likely are going to be on study for the entire length of the project, but those first 2 visits are so intense that you may have 50 people that make it through the first 2 visits, but only 25 participants that are going to be from visit 3 through visit 10. That's a scenario that's being discussed here. So there are a number of different ways that this could be handled to pay for those ongoing participants. You could either say, we're going to have that first visit paid if the first visit starts, because we're only talking about ongoing participants, of course, because all new participants are going to be paid for by the LOCs, no matter which visit they're in. But if you have a participant that had the first visit in the fiscal year 2017 award and the next visits in the 2018 award, there are actually 3 different ways that we're looking at the possibility of funding. We could actually say, and I really want you to think about this because you're going to need to think about this for charging. Is this going to be a charge that's going against the CTU because we've given you the money? Is it something that's just covered by the expenses that you're receiving in total from the CTU? Are you going to have to ask for this expense to the LOCs? So let's just take the three possible ways of funding it. We could say, okay, visit one, because remember, visit one is always paid for the LOC, no matter what. It's paid by the LOC, and it was paid by the LOC in fiscal year 2017. For visit number 2, we could just say, well, visit number 2 is going to be paid by the LOC anyway. So the first visit, the second visit, no matter what, if it's ongoing, no matter what, will be paid for the LOC. But if that participant was put on study prior to the 12/1/2017 award, the rest of those visits, visits 3 through 10, those predictable visits, would be paid for by the CTU. That's one scenario, one way of handling this. And as I say, think about this as you're thinking about how you're going to have to be getting reimbursed for these expenses. Another possibility would say, of course, that first visit is always paid for the LOC, and we're going to treat this like we would a typical, that first scenario, typical way, a protocol, which is visit 1 is paid for by the LOC because it's the first visit, and it was done in the last fiscal year, and visit 2 through 10, whatever visits need to take place, will be paid for on the CTU. We will be calculating those visits on for the CTU PF. Another possibility is to say, you know, because everything is so dependent on visit 1 and visit 2, that we're going to look at visit 2 as if it's actually also a first visit. So visit 1 is always a first visit. Visit 2 would be considered the same way we would look at the first visit. So in this particular case, that visit number 2 is in fiscal year 2018, and therefore it can be handled like any new protocol. It can be handled by it should be handled by the LOC because you're not really getting to number 3 until you've done number 2, and number 2 is sort of the deciding factor for that particular protocol. And therefore, since you're not doing it until the fiscal year 2018 award, then all of that will be paid for by the LOC's PF. I know this is extremely confusing, but I think it's something, as you're looking at this, I keep going back to, you need to be thinking about how you're going to be able to appropriately charge the project for, or charge the appropriate contract or grant for the visits that are taking place. We are not expecting it to be, in any case, are we expecting it to be a visit-by-visit reimbursement either.
So Mary, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
So who decides which of these scenarios is appropriate?
Well, that's one of the things that we're looking at now. I think it's going to be a decision worked through the Institute, as well as with discussions with CTUs and CRSs and networks.
So I think that's why we're having this discussion with you. We want your feedback, which will inform our final decision on this.
Great. And regardless of the scenarios, how will the screening costs be covered?
Screening costs are always going to be cost by the LOC. Screening costs are covered by the LOCs.
So I think the thing to keep in mind is whether or not some of these costs are unpredictable versus their costs that are known. You know, so with screening, there's no way to know before you screen how many you're going to screen or what those might be. So those unpredictable costs, typically, if you just think about it that way, are costs that will be paid by the LOC. And it's more of the predictable costs, as long as they're incurred by 11/30, will be paid by the CTU.
That's exactly right.
All right, I have another couple of questions. After receiving the NOA for ongoing participants on December 1, do we have to invoice for the PF money? And if we do, when?
No. The thing to remember is that we're planning to give those total amounts to the CTU. If you're not, if you are a independent organization with from the CTU, then of course you're going to have to invoice just like you're currently invoicing for core support. You'll be invoicing for the PF support. We don't expect it to be separate. We expect this to be for the total amount of money that we're giving to the CTU. There will not be a need to invoice by visit us. We don't see that there's a need for that invoicing, and actually one of the reasons why we're doing this is the predictability and to provide some level of stability to the organization, that they know that these are predictable costs and they are able to set up their organizations to be able to know that they have the funds to cover those predictable costs.
I might just add to that, though, that you are not invoicing NIAID at any point in time. So the invoicing that Mary is talking about is between the CTU and CRSs, just as you currently do.
Right.
Once we provide the funds to you, you're not invoicing NIAID at any point in time. Any invoicing that happens is either between the CTU and CRS or between the LOCs and the CTU. So we're not asking for any invoices. We give you the funds up front and that's it.
We're not probably, the thing to remember is that they're most likely that's the amount of money you're going to get from us as well. We're not increasing it or decreasing it, to be honest with you, based on what happens. We are providing you that amount of money, the stability and predictability for the predictable expenses for protocols.
So I have a concern here noted. So having multiple sources of funding that are used with a high level of variability could introduce a large burden to the administration of the CRSs. So what's your rationale and what's the benefit of making these changes?
Well, I'll just repeat what I've just said, which is the reason why we're looking at this as a benefit is to provide the CRSs a year's worth of support for their predictable expenses, that you are not having to ever second guess the amount of money you're getting for those expenses. You will have it in the notice of award.
And preferably to enhance your ability to plan for that year.
Yeah.
Because you have the funds up front, you know what it is, and then you can plan accordingly. It was one of the things we heard in our conversations.
Okay, are there any other comments? This has been wonderful. We truly appreciate all the comments that you've made, and I really want you to leave this particular webinar thinking about how you're going to institute this, and what could and not only thinking about how you'd be able to institute it. What I would love for you to be thinking about is what could be done to make it so that it's a smooth transition to this particular pilot. I think that would be very helpful as well. Oh, you know, I could handle it a little bit different. We have had to handle it this way because of the way we've been getting our PF funding, but this means that I can handle things somewhat differently for invoicing. I think I would really, really appreciate any input that you might have.
So we also want to hear any particular burdens you think that instituting this might present to you as an organization. So that's something that we really are very interested in hearing, and we want you to talk about.
So the very last slide, oops, I lost it. Can we get the last slide? Thank you. The very last slide is I know that we'll have a number of discussions on this. The thing to remember about the amount of money that's going to be part of this template and will be provided to the CTUs and the CRSs is it's necessary for you to understand that this is actually in total cost. That we will expect as you're looking at these expenses, for example, that $1 million that was going for MTN 025, that $1 million is a total cost. It's not direct cost. So you're thinking about how you're going to be using that $1 million as in total, both direct and indirect. And with that, I am done with my slides, and we can open this up for further discussion.
So please continue to submit questions through your question tab if you have any at this point.
I think I'm going to turn it over to Bola, and she can talk about, please give us any further information. I don't know how many more times we should say that, because I think it's really, for this to be a success, or for us to have a success in distributing PF, it's going to be necessary that we have your input and understanding what the issues are, what would have to be done, and what would have to be done to resolve them.
So I did get another question. How will protocol preparation and initiation costs be covered? Was that through the LOC?
Yes, I'm going to go back to that very first slide. Make your eyes spin. Hold on. Okay. As you can see, all the initiation expenses will be handled, including clinical trial insurance, will be handled by the LOC. As you can see that. We consider all those expenses that you mentioned in both questions, initiation expenses, that will be handled by the LOC. Because those are not predictable, obviously.
Any further questions?
Okay, so with that, we just want to, again, as Mary said, thank you all very much for your time this morning, this afternoon, and for the input that you provided. This has been very, very good. It's very useful information. It will help us to make some final determinations in here. And I can't overemphasize the importance of, saying that whatever input you provide to us, we are going to take that very seriously, and it would inform some of the decisions that we made. As I also mentioned earlier on, we have made some modification based on feedback that we've received from CTU, CRSs, and networks. So please keep your comments, questions going. The models that Mary presented here today are not set in stone. So those are working documents for this point. It does not mean that that is going to be the final product, and that's why we want you to keep sending your questions to us before we make that final determination, which we hope will come in the next couple of weeks. We have another question.
Yes, please. So can you please clarify which funding components will be provided by DAIDS and the LOC, basically to summarize, because it's not very clear how they're going to get their PF. Am I right to assume that we will now have a budget in our NOA for predictable expenses for PF?
That's exactly right. And I think this is probably, to me, the easiest explanation. This particular slide that's up really, hopefully, more easily explains where you're going to be, where the funds are going to come from for the different types of expenses. If it's a predictable expense for a participant that is known, is on study as of 11/30, those funds will be part of the CTU. If it's a predictable expense, you will also be provided for the closeout costs when it's necessary for those particular participants. And of course, to me, the easiest way of looking at it is the CTU will never pay for the first enrollment visit, ever pay for the first enrollment visit. And if the participant is added after 11/30, September 1 on, for the next budget period, it will be covered by the LOC.
All right, so does that mean that if I have a target of 25 participants who have, and then have enrolled 18 participants, will I receive funds for the total 25, or will this be split between two budget periods?
Okay, so let's just say you have, let's take that example. That's a great example. You're expected to put in, or you've negotiated with us, the LOCs, that you have 25 participants. You have, as of August 31st, 18 participants. Let's just say you have 18 participants as of August 31st. You are expecting to see another two participants between August 1st, or you end up having another two participants that were put on study from September 1st through 11/30. So your actual number of participants you have on study are 20 participants. You will be getting, because those are the actual, very predictable, because you actually have those participants in the study. Those are the predictable number of participants that you know for sure you're going to follow. You will be provided in the CTU award funds for those 25 participants.
20.
20, sorry,
Yeah.
20 participants. That's the reason why I made it even, so I could remember and I didn't. So you'll have the money in the CTU award for those 20 participants. 18 that were on study as of 8/31 and 2 more on study through up to 11/30.
And the way those funds will be put into your award are that in December, you will get the funds with your NOA for the first 18 participants. And then in March, when we revise the award, you'll get the additional funds for those 2 participants. So the original 25 that you told us about, or you told the network about, is just a number for planning and projection. That doesn't mean you get it, because what we will end up paying you from the division or from NIAID will be for the actual participants that you do have on study as of 8/31 and then as of 11/30.
But if you do continue to enroll, for example, for those 5 remaining participants, they would be considered new during that budget period, and you would be invoicing the LOC for those new enrollees just as you do now.
So all the notice of award for the, I guess bottom line, the notice of award for the CTU will be for all actual participants as of 11/30. I think that's the important thing to mention. It's for all actual participants. The LOC will always pay for any new participants that are added after 12/1.
So, and in addition to that, what the LOC is paying for is those unpredictable costs. So, you know, in this particular example that we gave, we've provided funds in the CTU NOA for those 20 participants. But perhaps, you know, one of them came in for an interim visit that required some kind of a test that was not known at the time that we originally provided that notice of award. Those funds for those unpredictable tests or unpredictable activities will be funds that you will get paid by the LOC or by the network.
So basically, is this an advanced model of payment and not cost reimbursable?
And, you know, I think that that's one of the things, we've had that mentioned a couple times in discussions. It's really something that we're going to want to talk with the CTU and how they're going to be setting it up if you're a CRS that's contracting with the CTU. We will be providing the funds for those participants, known participants. We will be providing those funds in the CTU award. So we will not be revising an award, 10 or 5 or 6 or once a month award to provide for cost reimbursement by any means. We will be providing the funds to the CTU for an entire year of predictable expenses for ongoing participants in December and in March.
All right, and the amount for the actual participants, who's going to determine that? The LOC, but not the CRS?
Most of the time, my understanding is the LOC is working with the CRSs. It is an LOC decision because they're the ones that are going to be providing us the protocol expenses.
Okay, I have another comment. So please note that it's possible that a CTU affiliated CRS is a protocol-specific site in another network. Will PF for that CRS in the other network, will their protocol be included in the CTU award or come from the other network's LOC?
I understand that question, and actually that is a question that we have not finalized yet. We are working towards what we just haven't finalized. I think that that's one of the questions we've had and we need to have additional discussion on.
Yeah, but if you have specific thoughts about that one way or the other, we'd love to hear from you.
Exactly.
We have talked about it internally though and haven't made a final decision.
All right, and is the CTU NOA going to be, is the PF in the CTU NOA going to be restricted either by study or by network as it has been in the past?
No. There may be a particular protocol that we're going to have to restrict, but we expect that to be very, very rare. And as of right this second, we can only think of one.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the benefits we think of this model is that, you know, we will provide you with a table that breaks down, you know, what the LOCs recommended. However, the awards will not be restricted. So if you're able to realize some efficiencies by implementing one protocol, you are free to rebudget those funds into something else. However, with the understanding that you cannot come back to us and say, we spent all the funds for protocol 1, and now we need additional funds. You will know how many participants you need to be able to manage, and if you realize some efficiencies from that, you can then rebudget to other things that are covered within, that are allowable within the award.
But the award itself would cover all of those ongoing participants across all networks.
Okay, great. I have another question. We currently have ACTG guaranteed PF funds for executive committee meetings and reprieve sub-study and that. Will I then have 6 studies to track for the first 2 participants, then these funds will be added to the CTU, and I then have to track these funds buried in within the CTU overall funds? I may not be understanding everything, so I apologize. I'm just wondering about the administrative burden.
Okay, so that's one of the reasons why we provided that slide that had 3 separate options for that particular scenario. Right this very second, we have not come to a final determination on how we would need to handle that. Our premise right now is that the first visit will always be handled by the network. That's because that's an unpredictable expense. You don't know if that individual, we cannot predict at the beginning of the budget period whether or not you're going to have individuals and the number of visits they're going to have. Now, with that, taking that one step further, that if it is a new, the information that we believe that the CRS and the CTU is really going to have to understand in this model as they're looking at expenses is how much of those expenses are necessary, are ongoing for those predictable participants, PPTs, and how much of it is for new PPTs. If it's predictable expenses for what is determined on the slide as ongoing participants, those participants that were put on study 1130 or earlier, then it is going to be part of the notice of grant award. If a participant is put on study after that, all those visits will be funded through the LOC for the next budget period.
Okay, and we actually got a couple of questions to ask when the slides will be available and when the recording will be available. So barring any technical difficulties, I hope to have this posted on the Network Refining website by early next week, and we will definitely send out a notice to everybody to let you know when it's posted.
Okay. But I also want to stress the importance of, please reach out to us. We will have a call with you if you feel that that would be useful for you. We're happy to do that with small groups as necessary. So, you know, I think maybe 1 or 2 of the questions, if we haven't completely answered that question or you feel that you want some additional information, you know, we'll be happy to do that.
And we would love to hear how you would, how you were thinking about invoicing this, how you would be handling this. Think about, I don't think you could probably, it's going to take a little time for all these slides and everything to set in, but start thinking about how you're going to be handling your accounting and bookkeeping.
Okay. All right. Thank you. With that, we'll bring the webinar to a close. Thank you all very much, and have a good rest of the day.
Or evening.
or evening.